The morning sun cast long shadows across the tranquil waters of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Seaman First Class James Mitchell wiped the sleep from his eyes as he emerged from the USS Arizona's cramped quarters, breathing in the warm Hawaiian air that carried the scent of plumeria and salt water. Around him, the Pacific Fleet lay at anchor like sleeping giants, their gray hulls gleaming in the early light. Battleship Row stretched before him in perfect formation, the Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Tennessee, creating an imposing line of American naval power. Mitchell had been stationed at Pearl Harbor for 8 months, and the routine had become second nature. Sunday mornings were typically quiet, with most sailors enjoying shore leave or sleeping in after Saturday night's festivities in Honolulu. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves against the harbor's concrete piers, and the distant call of seabirds circling overhead. Admiral Husband Kimmel had assured his fleet that the Hawaiian Islands were the safest place in the Pacific, far removed from the growing tensions in Europe and Asia. Unknown to Mitchell and his shipmates, 6 aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy had been cutting through the Pacific swells for 11 days, their destination shrouded in absolute secrecy. Vice Admiral Kiichi Nagamo commanded the 1st Air Fleet from the flagship Akagi, his weathered face betraying none of the anxiety that gnawed at his stomach. The success of Operation Hawaii, as the Japanese called their audacious plan, would determine whether the Empire of the Rising Sun could dominate the Pacific or face inevitable defeat at the hands of American industrial might. 360 miles north of Oahu, the Japanese strike force turned into the wind. The carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shikaku, and Zuikaku pitched and rolled in the heavy seas as flight crews made final preparations. Commander Mitsuo Fukita, leader of the first wave, pulled on his flight suit and checked his equipment. One last time. In his cockpit, he carried a message that would be transmitted to the entire Japanese fleet upon successful completion of the attack. Tora! Tora! The code phrase meaning complete surprise had been achieved. Back at Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey was reviewing intelligence reports in his office at Fort Island. The reports were troubling increased Japanese radio traffic, diplomatic negotiations at a standstill, and mounting evidence that Emperor Hirohito's military was preparing for something significant. Yet the warnings from Washington seemed distant and abstract compared to the peaceful scene outside his window. The harbor was home to 8 battleships, numerous cruisers and destroyers, and hundreds of aircraft lined up wingtip to wingtip at Hickam Field and Wheeler Army Airfield. As documented in the official Navy Department communique released December 8, 1941, the attack would begin at 7:55 in the morning, catching the American forces in a state of complete unpreparedness. The irony was not lost on those who would later analyze the intelligence. Failures every piece of the puzzle had been available, yet no one had assembled the complete picture of Japan's intentions. The stage was set for one of the most devastating surprise attacks in military history, an assault that would transform the United States from a reluctant observer of global conflict into the world's most determined combatant. In a matter of hours, the quiet Sunday morning would become a day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would declare would live in infamy. At 6 o'clock on the morning of December 7th, the first wave of Japanese aircraft roared off. The pitching decks of the 6 carriers, Commander Fukita led 183 planes through the gray Dawn 49 Nakajima Kate torpedo bombers, 40 Afichi Val dive bombers, 51 more Kates carrying armor-piercing bombs, and 43 Mitsubishi Zero fighters. The formation climbed steadily through scattered clouds, their destination clearly marked by the distinctive shape of Diamond Head, crater rising from the Hawaiian coastline. Fukita checked his watch, 7:49, 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Through his cockpit window, he could see the entire American Pacific Fleet spread out below like toys in a bathtub. Not a single ship appeared to be moving, and the airfield showed no signs of defensive preparations. The commander's heart raced as he reached for his radio transmitter. This was the moment that would change everything. "Tora! Tora! Tora!" The transmission crackled across the airwaves, informing Admiral Nagamo that complete tactical surprise had been achieved. Fuchida pushed his control stick forward, leading his squadron into the attack that would drag America into the Second World War. The first bombs fell on Ford Island at exactly 7:55. Petty Officer Second Class Henry Johnson was walking across the tarmac when the earth erupted beneath his feet. The explosion threw him 20 feet through the air, his ears ringing from the concussion. As he struggled to his feet, he looked up to see aircraft with distinctive red circles on their wings diving toward the neat rows of American planes. "Those are Japs!" He shouted to no one in particular, his voice lost in the growing cacophony of explosions and machine gun fire. On Battleship Row, the USS Oklahoma took the first torpedo hit at 7:56. The massive warship shuddered as a wall of water erupted along her port side. Within minutes, 4 more torpedoes struck home, each one tearing massive holes in the Oklahoma's hull. Chief Petty Officer Adolph Bothon felt the deck tilting beneath his feet as thousands of tons of seawater poured into the ship's compartments. "All hands abandon ship," came the order, but for many sailors trapped below decks, it was already too late. The USS Arizona became the symbol of American tragedy when a converted 16-inch naval shell dropped from Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Akira's Cape bomber penetrated the forward magazine at 8:06. The explosion lifted the entire forward section of the battleship into the air, creating a mushroom cloud visible from 20 miles away. Seaman Mitchell, who had been admiring the peaceful morning just an hour earlier, was among the 1,177 men who died in that single devastating blast. According to contemporary reports, published in the Honolulu Star Bulletin's emergency edition that same day, the attack achieved complete tactical surprise, despite numerous warning signs that had gone unheeded by American intelligence services. Lieutenant Commander Ramsey was among the first to radio the famous message, "Air Raid Pearl Harbor." This is not a drill. The Japanese pilots pressed their attack with methodical precision. Kate torpedo bombers skimmed across the harbor's surface at barely 50 feet altitude, releasing their deadly fish almost within touching distance of the American ships. Valdive bombers screamed down from 8,000 feet, their pilots selecting targets with careful deliberation. The USS West Virginia took 7 torpedo hits and settled into the harbor mud, while the USS California slowly listed to port as water flooded her compartments. At Wheeler Army Airfield, Captain Rasmussen watched in horror as Japanese Zeros strafed the neat rows of American fighters. The P-40 Warhawks and P-36 Hawks had been parked wingtip to prevent sabotage, a precaution that now made them perfect targets for the attacking aircraft. Within minutes, the majority of the American Air Force in Hawaii was reduced to smoking wreckage. The first wave's attack lasted exactly 35 minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. As Fuchida's aircraft climbed away from the burning harbor, he could see that the American Pacific Fleet had been crippled. Black smoke rose from a dozen ships, and the distinctive shape of the Arizona's superstructure was barely visible above the oil-covered water. The surprise had been complete, but the war was just beginning. As the first wave of Japanese aircraft disappeared into the morning haze, a brief lull settled over Pearl Harbor. The silence was broken only by the crackle of flames, the groans of twisted metal, and the desperate cries of men trapped in the water. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua, the Arizona's damage control officer and one of the few senior officers to survive the magazine explosion, organized rescue efforts even as oil fires spread across the harbor's surface. At 8:40, radar operator Private Joseph Lockard detected the second wave approaching from the northwest. 171 aircraft under Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki were closing fast 54 Kate high-level bombers, 78 Val dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters. This time, the Americans would not be caught completely off guard. Chief Aviation Machinist Mate John Finn had been wounded in the first attack, but refused medical attention. Instead, he mounted a .50 caliber machine gun on an instruction stand at Kaneo Bay Naval Air Station and began firing at the incoming Japanese aircraft. Despite suffering multiple wounds from strafing runs, Finn continued to man his gun throughout the second wave, his determined resistance earning him the Medal of Honor and serving as an inspiration to his fellow sailors. The second wave concentrated on targets that had escaped the first attack. Shimazaki's bombers targeted the Navy Yard, where the destroyers Shaw, Cassin, and Downs were in dry dock. A direct hit on the Shaw's forward magazine created a spectacular explosion that photographers made Harold Fawcett captured in what would become one of the war's most iconic images. The blast was so powerful that the destroyer's forward section was completely obliterated, though remarkably, the ship would eventually be rebuilt and returned to service. At Hickam Field, Technical Sergeant William Schick organized a desperate defense of the base's remaining aircraft. Armed with nothing more than rifles and pistols, Schick and his men engaged the low-flying Japanese fighters in a hopeless but courageous battle. The technical sergeant personally shot down 1-0 with a Thompson submachine gun before being killed by return fire. His actions saved several American aircraft from destruction and demonstrated the fighting spirit that would characterize America's response to the attack. The USS Pennsylvania, flagship of the Pacific Fleet, was in dry dock when the second wave struck. Admiral Kimmel watched from his headquarters as dive bombers screamed toward his flagship. The Pennsylvania's anti-aircraft crews had finally gotten into action, their guns filling the sky with deadly tracers. Seaman First Class Peter Tomek, a veteran of the First World War, remained at his post in the USS Utah's engine room, ensuring that steam pressure was maintained for the ship's electrical power even as the vessel capsized. His sacrifice allowed many of his shipmates to escape. Though Tomek himself would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the harbor's defenders began to fight back with increasing effectiveness. Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor and Second Lieutenant George Welch had managed to reach Halaiwa Airfield, where a few P-40 fighters had escaped destruction. Taking off without orders, they engaged the Japanese aircraft in aerial combat, shooting down 7 enemy planes between them. Their unauthorized flight marked the beginning of organized American resistance. As documented in the official Army Air Forces report compiled in early 1942, the second wave encountered significantly more resistance than the first. American anti-aircraft guns, which had been silent during the initial assault, now filled the sky with exploding shells. Several Japanese aircraft were shot down, including Lieutenant Commander Shimazaki's own bomber, though the veteran pilot managed to survive the crash. The attack on the USS Nevada became a symbol of American determination. The battleship's crew, led by Ensign Joseph Tausig, attempted to escape the harbor despite severe damage from the first wave. As the Nevada struggled toward the harbor entrance, Japanese dive bombers concentrated their attacks on the moving target. Chief Bosun Edwin Hill swam through burning oil to reach the ship and help beach her safely, preventing the vessel from sinking in the channel and blocking the harbor entrance. By 9:45, the second wave was withdrawing, and the great attack was over. The harbor lay shrouded in black smoke, with 8 battleships damaged or destroyed, 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers severely damaged, and 164 aircraft destroyed. But the Japanese had failed to achieve their ultimate objective, the complete destruction of American naval power in the Pacific. The aircraft carriers Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga were at sea, and the harbor's vital repair facilities remained largely intact. The attack was over, But the battle for survival had just begun. Throughout Pearl Harbor, men faced impossible choices as they struggled to save their ships and shipmates from the inferno that had consumed the Pacific Fleet. The oil-covered waters burned with an intensity that turned the harbor into a vision of hell, yet heroes emerged from every corner of the devastation. Doris Miller, a 22-year-old mess attendant aboard the USS West Virginia, had been below decks when the first torpedo struck. Despite having no formal training on anti-aircraft weapons, Miller helped move his mortally wounded captain to safety before manning a .50 caliber machine gun. For 15 minutes, the young sailor from Texas poured fire into the attacking Japanese aircraft until ordered to abandon ship. His actions shattered racial barriers and earned him the Navy Cross, making him one of the first African-American heroes of the Second World War. On the capsized USS Oklahoma, Seaman First Class Stephen Young found himself trapped in a flooded compartment with 31 other sailors. As the ship settled into the harbor mud, Young organized the men into shifts, keeping them calm while they waited for rescue. For more than 30 hours, they survived in an air pocket, tapping on the hull to signal rescue crews. Young's leadership saved the lives of 31 men who would otherwise have perished in the sunken battleship. Captain Mervyn Benyon, commanding officer of the USS West Virginia, was mortally wounded by shrapnel during the first wave, but refused to leave his bridge. As his ship burned around him, Benyon continued to direct damage control efforts and coordinate the defense of his vessel. His executive officer, Commander Roscoe Hillencotter, later described how the captain remained at his post despite severe abdominal wounds, inspiring his crew through his example of duty and sacrifice. The hospital ship USS Solace became a beacon of hope in the harbor's darkness. Chief Pharmacist's mate John Carmichael organized medical teams that treated hundreds of wounded sailors, many suffering from severe burns and smoke inhalation. Working without adequate supplies or equipment, Carmichael and his team performed surgery on the ship's deck, saving countless lives through their improvised medical care. The Solace's white hull, marked with red crosses, became a symbol of mercy amidst the devastation. At the submarine base, Lieutenant Commander William Outerbridge was preparing to investigate reports of a suspicious vessel when the attack began. The commander of the USS Ward had actually fired the first American shots of the Pacific War at 6:45 that morning, sinking a Japanese Maite submarine attempting to enter the harbor. Outerbridge's quick thinking and decisive action marked the beginning of America's active participation in the Second World War, though the significance of his encounter would not be understood until much later. As referenced in the official Navy Department casualty reports published in January 1942, the attack claimed the lives of 2,403 Americans and wounded 1,178 others. Yet these numbers could not capture the individual acts of heroism that occurred throughout the morning. Fireman First Class Robert Scott remained at his post aboard the USS California, maintaining steam pressure for the ship's pumps even as compartments flooded around him. His dedication kept the battleship afloat long enough for most of her crew to escape. The civilian population of Honolulu also responded with remarkable courage. Dr. Pinkerton, chief of surgery at Tripler Army Hospital, organized emergency medical teams that treated military and civilian casualties alike. His wife, a registered nurse, worked alongside him for 18 straight hours, caring for victims of the attack. Their hospital became a model of civilian-military cooperation that would characterize Hawaii's response to the war. Perhaps the most poignant hero was Seaman First Class James Ward, who died trying to save his trapped shipmates aboard the USS Arizona. Ward had escaped the initial explosion but returned to the burning ship 3 times, carrying wounded sailors to safety. On his 4th rescue attempt, a secondary explosion killed him instantly. His body was never recovered, but his sacrifice exemplified the brotherhood that bound the Pacific Fleet together. the stories of heroism continued. Throughout the day, as rescue crews worked frantically to save trapped sailors, Chief Petty Officer John Vason led a diving team that cut holes in the hull of the capsized Oklahoma, rescuing 32 men from what should have been certain death. His team worked for 2 days straight, refusing relief until every possible survivor had been recovered from the sunken battleship. The sun set on December 7th, 1941, illuminating a harbor transformed beyond recognition, where the mighty Pacific Fleet had rested peacefully that morning. Twisted metal and burning oil now marked the graves of 18 American warships. The USS Arizona continued to burn, her oil-fed fires creating a pillar of black smoke that could be seen from the island's mountains. Yet even as rescue crews worked through the night, pulling survivors from the wreckage, a different kind of awakening was taking place across the American continent. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was having lunch at the White House when Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox burst into the room with the devastating news. "Mr. President, it appears that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor." Roosevelt's face drained of color as he absorbed the implications. The isolationist sentiment that had kept America out of the European war had been shattered in a single morning. Within hours, the president was dictating his response to Congress, the speech that would ask for a declaration of war against the Empire of Japan. In Hawaii, martial law was declared at 4:20 that afternoon. General Walter Short, who had been criticized for his peacetime security measures, now found himself responsible for defending the islands against a possible invasion. Rumors spread through Honolulu that Japanese paratroopers had landed on the beaches and that the Imperial Navy's carriers were preparing for a second attack. Civilians were ordered to remain indoors, and a complete blackout was imposed across the island. The psychological impact of the attack extended far beyond the physical damage to ships and aircraft. Admiral Kimmel, who had assured Washington that Pearl Harbor was impregnable, submitted his resignation within days of the attack. The admiral's career was destroyed, and he would spend the rest of his life defending his actions on that fateful morning. The attack had not only crippled the Pacific Fleet, but had also shattered the confidence of America's military leadership throughout the mainland United States. The news of Pearl Harbor created a wave of patriotic fervor unlike anything seen since the Civil War. Recruiting stations were overwhelmed by volunteers, many of them men who had been content to let Europe fight its own battles. In Detroit, assembly lines that had been producing automobiles began retooling for tanks and aircraft. The industrial might that had made America the world's largest economy was now mobilizing for war. The Japanese, meanwhile, were celebrating their tactical victory while grappling with its strategic implications. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, was quoted as saying, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." The admiral understood that Japan's only hope for victory lay in forcing a quick peace before American industrial capacity could be brought to bear against the empire. As documented in the comprehensive report prepared by the Roberts Commission. In early 1942, the attack revealed serious deficiencies in American intelligence gathering and military preparedness. The failure to detect and interpret Japanese intentions would lead to a complete reorganization of America's intelligence services and a fundamental change in military doctrine. Never again would American forces be caught so completely off guard. Human cost of the attack became clear as casualty reports were compiled. The USS Arizona alone had lost 1,177 men, more than half of the total American deaths. Families across the nation received the dreaded telegram informing them that their sons, husbands, and fathers had died in the service of their country. The attack had created a generation of Gold Star families, united in their grief and their determination to see justice done. In the harbor itself, the work of salvage and recovery continued around the clock. The USS Oklahoma was too badly damaged to be completely restored, but the Navy was determined to raise every ship possible. The massive task of cleaning up the harbor would take months, but it represented more than just engineering. It was a symbol of American resilience and determination. Every ship that could be salvaged was a victory against the Japanese Empire. The international implications of the attack were enormous. Great Britain, which had been fighting Germany alone for more than 2 years, now had the ally it desperately needed. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later wrote that he slept the sleep of the saved and thankful on the night of December 7th, knowing that American entry into the war made eventual victory inevitable. The attack had transformed a regional conflict into a truly global war. At 12:30 in the afternoon on December 8, 1942, President Roosevelt entered the House of Representatives to address a joint session of Congress. His speech, lasting just over 6 minutes, would become one of the most famous in American history and formally mark the United States' entry into the Second World War. The president's words were carried live by radio to an estimated 60 million Americans, the largest audience in the medium's history to that point. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Roosevelt's voice carried a mixture of righteous anger and steely determination that resonated with a nation still reeling from the surprise attack. The president's speech was interrupted by thunderous applause as he detailed the extent of Japanese aggression across the Pacific. Within 33 minutes of the president's speech, Congress had voted to declare war on Japan. The Senate vote was unanimous, while the House recorded just one dissenting vote, Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana, who had also voted against American entry into the First World War. The speed of the congressional response reflected the unified national mood following the Pearl Harbor attack. America was going to war with a determination that had been absent during the prolonged debates over intervention in Europe. The declaration of war triggered a massive mobilization effort across the United States. Within hours of the congressional vote, the Selective Service System began processing applications from volunteers who had overwhelmed recruiting stations. The attack had solved Roosevelt's political problem of how to bring America into the war. Isolationist sentiment had evaporated overnight, replaced by a burning desire for revenge against the Japanese Empire. On the same day, Hitler made one of his greatest strategic errors by declaring war on the United States. The German dictator's decision meant that America would now fight a two-front war, but it also meant that Roosevelt could concentrate on defeating fascism in Europe without having to justify the priority to the American people. The Japanese attack had given the president the political capital he needed to pursue his Europe First strategy. Back in Pearl Harbor, the immediate crisis was far from over. Intelligence reports suggested that the Japanese fleet might return for a second attack, possibly supported by an invasion force. Admiral William Pye, who had assumed temporary command of the Pacific Fleet, ordered all available ships to defensive positions while frantically trying to determine the location of the Japanese carriers. The psychological impact of the attack was such that every radar contact was treated as a potential enemy formation. As documented in the classified War Department analysis completed in March 1942, the attack had achieved its immediate tactical objectives while failing completely in its strategic goals. The Japanese had succeeded in crippling the American battle line, but they had failed to destroy the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers, fuel storage facilities, and repair installations. More importantly, they had unified American public opinion in a way that made compromise peace impossible. The attack's impact on American industry was immediate and profound. Factories that had been producing consumer goods began converting to military production within days of the declaration of war. The Ford Motor Company announced that it would cease civilian automobile production and concentrate on building bombers. General Motors followed suit, beginning the transformation that would make America the arsenal of democracy. The human drama of Pearl Harbor continued to unfold as families across the nation learned the fate of their loved ones. Mrs. Thomas Murdoch of Winslow, Arizona, received word that all 5 of her sons serving aboard the USS Arizona had been killed in the attack. The Murdoch family's sacrifice became a symbol of the price America would pay for victory, and their story was featured in newspapers across the country as an example of patriotic duty. Religious leaders across America struggled to make sense of the attack's meaning. Reverend Peter Marshall, chaplain of the United States Senate, delivered a sermon that captured the national mood. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not just an attack on American ships and planes, it was an attack on the American way of life, on our belief in freedom and democracy. Churches across the nation held special services to pray for the souls of the Pearl Harbor dead and for victory in the war that was just beginning. The attack had also revealed the vulnerability of America's Pacific possessions. Within hours of Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched attacks on the Philippines, Guam, and Wake Island. General Douglas MacArthur's Air Force in the Philippines was caught on the ground, despite having received word of the Pearl Harbor attack hours earlier. The pattern of surprise and initial Japanese success was being repeated across the Pacific, but America was now awake and mobilizing for the greatest war in human history. 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz stood on the deck of the USS Enterprise as American dive bombers screamed down toward the Japanese carriers at Midway. The Pacific Fleet, rebuilt and reorganized after the devastation of December 7th, was about to deliver a crushing blow to the same enemy that had caught them by surprise. The Battle of Midway would mark the turning point in the Pacific War, but it was the sacrifice and heroism of the Pearl Harbor defenders that had made this moment possible. The salvage operation at Pearl Harbor became one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the war. The USS California, which had been sunk at her moorings, was raised and completely rebuilt with modern equipment. The West Virginia underwent similar reconstruction, emerging from the Navy Yard as a more powerful warship than she had been before the attack. Even the seemingly hopeless case of the USS Oklahoma was partially salvaged, though she was too badly damaged to return to service. The USS Arizona, however, would remain where she fell. The decision to leave the battleship as a permanent memorial was made in 1943, when it became clear that the cost of raising her would exceed the value of returning her to service. The Arizona became a shrine to the 1,900 men still entombed within her hull, a reminder of the price of unpreparedness and the courage of those who died in America's service. Many of the heroes of Pearl Harbor went on to distinguished service in the Pacific War. Doris Miller, the mess attendant who had manned an anti-aircraft gun during the attack, was promoted to cook 3rd class and awarded the Navy Cross by Admiral Nimitz personally. Miller continued to serve in the Pacific until November 1943, when he was killed aboard the USS Liscum Bay during the Battle of Macon. His heroism at Pearl Harbor had helped break down racial barriers in the Navy, paving the way for the integration of America's armed forces. Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor, who had shot down 4 Japanese aircraft despite being wounded, became one of America's leading fighter aces. Taylor survived the war and retired as a brigadier general. But he never forgot the lesson of Pearl Harbor, that freedom requires constant vigilance and the willingness to fight for one's beliefs. His unauthorized takeoff on December 7th became a symbol of American initiative and courage under fire. The attack's impact on American strategy was profound and lasting. The doctrine of forward defense, which had placed the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in the first place, was replaced by a more aggressive strategy of taking the war to the enemy. The United States would spend the next 4 years building a navy larger than all other navies combined, while launching amphibious assaults across the Pacific that would carry American forces to the very shores of Japan. As documented in the Official Navy Department History, published in 1947. The attack on Pearl Harbor cost the United States 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and 164 aircraft. The human cost was 2,403 dead and 1,178 wounded. Yet the attack's ultimate result was the mobilization of American industrial and military might on a scale never before seen in human history. The psychological impact of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. The attack shattered America's sense of geographic security and created a determination to prevent any future surprise attacks. This resolve would shape American foreign policy for decades to come, leading to the creation of NATO, the establishment of overseas military bases, and the development of intelligence agencies capable of monitoring threats anywhere in the world. The Japanese planners who conceived the Pearl Harbor attack had calculated that America lacked the will to fight a prolonged war in the Pacific. They could not have been more wrong. The attack united the American people in a way that no political leader could have achieved, creating a national consensus for total war that would not waver until Japan's surrender in August 1945. Admiral Yamamoto's prediction about awakening a sleeping giant proved tragically accurate from the Japanese perspective. The memory of Pearl Harbor became a rallying cry for American forces throughout the Pacific War. "Remember Pearl Harbor" appeared on propaganda posters, was painted on the sides of bombers, and was shouted by Marines as they stormed Japanese-held beaches. The attack had created a debt of honor that could only be repaid through victory, and American forces carried that debt with them across the Pacific. Today, the USS Arizona Memorial stands over the sunken battleship as a testament to the courage and sacrifice of those who died on December 7, 1941. More than 2 million visitors each year come to pay their respects to the Pearl Harbor dead and to remember the day that changed America forever. The memorial serves as a reminder that freedom is never free and that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. The attack on Pearl Harbor transformed the United States from a reluctant observer of global conflict into the world's most powerful military force. The sleeping giant had indeed awakened, and its terrible resolve would reshape the world order for generations to come. The heroes of Pearl Harbor had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had made possible the victory that followed, and the peace that endures to this day.